Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table. In today's video, we're going to start a series on the book of Revelation. It's a series that I call The Day of the Lord, a study of the book of Revelation. Today's video will be just an introduction, and it'll be a PowerPoint presentation, a slide presentation for you. So I hope you enjoy this series, and I hope it helps you in understanding the book of Revelation. This is an introduction to a series called The Day of the Lord, a study of the book of Revelation. If the book of Revelation did not exist, we would still possess an abundance of material concerning God's eschatological day of judgment through the Old Testament prophets, Jesus' teaching, and Paul's epistles. But we should be thankful for the book of Revelation because it gives us a detailed and systematic account of the outpouring of God's wrath via the trumpet and bowl judgments, developing a richer picture of the day of the Lord. This systematic judgment phenomena is not new in Scripture. For example, God systematically intensified the plagues upon Egypt. The very first kingdom to persecute God's people, Egypt experienced God's systematic wrath. Likewise, the very last kingdom to persecute God's people, the Antichrist kingdom, will also be subjected to God's systematic wrath. This quotation is from the book Antichrist Before the Day of the Lord by Alan Kirshner. Now, the above quotation emphasizes one of the main pillars of this series of lessons and on the book of Revelation, which is the only way to truly understand Revelation is to study the Old Testament. Now, historically, there have been two major areas of disagreement among Christians regarding how to understand the book of Revelation. The first is, are the events portrayed in this book to be taken as literal and historical, or as symbolic and timeless? Premillennialists take this book as literal and historical. Amillennialists generally take this book as symbolic and timeless. So furthermore, on the lines of this first question, if they are literal historical events, then were these events fulfilled in the first century, which is known as preterism? Are they unfolding throughout church history, which is known as historicism? Or will they primarily occur in the future in relation to the return of Jesus Christ, which is known as futurism? And then the second question is, how is the book of Revelation structured? Most Christians agree there is a prologue in the book of Revelation, generally chapter 1, and an epilogue in the book of Revelation, generally the end of chapter 22. It is also widely agreed that the letters to the seven churches found in Revelation 2 and 3 are also a discernibly distinct section. Thus, this question regarding the book's structure primarily centers around the main body, which is Revelation 4 through 22. Amillennialists, and to a great extent the preterists, and even many historicists, structure the main body as timeless moral and spiritual truths in the battle between good and evil. Most of the Catholic denominations fall into this category, which is understandable considering in general they have endured persecutions and martyrdom for a much longer time than the Protestant denominations. Premillennialists, however, along with some historicists, structure the main body in a temporal fashion as a sequence of events occurring in specific time periods. Within the premillennial camp, many structure Revelation as a kingdom division, in which chapters 1 through 11 speaks of the earth under Satan's kingdom, while chapters 12 through 22 speaks of the Lord God reclaiming his creation as his own kingdom. Those who structure the book this way understand the events portrayed in chapters 12 through 22 as the fleshing out or an expansion of the events that are found in chapters 6 through 11. So it's kind of like a repetition of what you find in the chapters 6 through 11 is what they think 12 through 22 is. The other primary structure of Revelation found among premillennialists is the one that is most conspicuous with even a cursory reading of the book, the septet arrangement, the set of 7. This is the structural arrangement followed in this series, and this arrangement has 5 series of septets. The first one is the letters to the 7 churches, 7 letters to 7 churches. The second one, the scroll with 7 seals. The third septet are the 7 trumpet judgments. The fourth septet are the 7 bowl or 7 vial judgments. And by the way, these judgments will deliver God the Father's final wrath prior to the second advent of His only begotten Son. And then finally, the 7 visions. Now the 7 visions are found in Revelation 12 through 14, and this is the only septet that is not specifically enumerated within the book of Revelation. And what I mean by that is, you take the 7 bowl judgments, and the book will read the first bowl, the second bowl, and so on. The 7 visions are not written quite that way, but there are 7 visions found in these 3 chapters, 12, 13, and 14. There is one other literary phenomenon featured in Revelation, which is very important, but too often minimalized, and it's the use of parenthetical breaks. Parentheses are pauses in the narrative, providing development on previous events before moving on to the next events. And there are minor parenthetical breaks scattered throughout the book. However, there are 2 major parenthetical passages. And these are Revelation chapters 12 through 14 and Revelation chapter 17, verse 1 through 20, verse 3. Revelation chapters 1 through 11 is a natural sequence which takes the reader up to the completion of the 7-year tribulation period. However, before we are allowed to see this completion of the 7-year tribulation period, we find the first major parenthetical pause in Revelation chapters 12 through 14. These chapters give a panoramic overview of the kingdom conflict between Satan and God. This section spans the period of the initial messianic promise of Israel's history up to and including the first advent of Jesus Christ. It then focuses mainly on the Antichrist great tribulation of the saints. Finally, this section concludes with the harvest of the saints and the enemies of God at Jesus Christ's second coming. This section ends with the judgment of God's enemies. And then the previous narrative is then picked up again in Revelation chapters 15 and 16. Now, the second major parenthetical pause is found in Revelation chapters 17:1 through 20, verse 3. And these chapters develop several well-known events within the book of Revelation. These events include the 6th and 7th bowl judgments, the great harlot and the beast authority, the destruction of the great city of Babylon, God being glorified from heaven, the marriage supper of the Lamb, and the defeat of the adversaries of God. The narrative of the book then concludes with the highlights of the beginning of the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, found in Revelation 20, verse 4 through 22:21. The purpose of this introductory lesson is to help us interpret the book of Revelation properly. We must realize that we cannot force every chapter into a chronological order, or else we'll be confounded by conflicting events. The question of chronology is resolved only when we recognize Revelation chapters 12 through 14 as a parenthetical break containing 7 visions, which develop the previous events, primarily within the 7-year tribulation period. Thus, the structure we'll be using to properly interpret Revelation is from the book Antichrist Before the Day of the Lord, as follows. Chapters 1 through 3 are the prologue and the recipients of the book. Chapters 4 through 7, what happens before the day of the Lord. Chapters 8 and 9 are the day of the Lord. In chapters 10 through 11, the 7-year tribulation is completed. Chapters 12 and 14, the first parenthetical break, speaks of the cosmic conflict. Then in chapters 15 through 16, you have the day of the Lord completed. And then chapters 17 through 20, the fall of Babylon and the Antichrist, is the second parenthetical break. Chapters 20 through 22, the beginning of the millennium and the renewal. And then finally, the rest of chapter 2 is the epilogue of the book of Revelation. Note that this entire series, The Day of the Lord, a study of the book of Revelation, is based upon a very literal interpretation of the entire Bible. The versions used throughout this series are primarily the New King James, the King James, the New American Standard, and the Septuagint translations of the Bible. These are sources which this series considers foundational, reliable, and unimpeachable, yet, depending upon the translation and the interpreter, leaves room for various doctrines as seen in the above paragraphs regarding the areas of disagreement on the book of Revelation. As a reminder, the Septuagint, which is the Old Testament only, and the overwhelming majority of English Bible versions are not always in agreement. And this is due to the Septuagint being translated from the original Hebrew text, which we no longer have, and today's versions of the Protestant Bible being translated from the Masoretic text. And the Masoretic text is actually a retranslation of the Old Testament from the Greek back into the Hebrew by the Masorete sect of Judaism. And that retranslation began around 100 AD and was completed around 1000 AD. Where they disagree, where the Masoretic text and the Septuagint disagree, this series differs to the Septuagint, as it is the translation Jesus and the writers of the New Testament overwhelmingly quoted from and referred to. It is also the text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Both the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls predate the Masoretic text by at least 300 years and up to 1300 years. And before I go any farther, you'll notice that a previous slide said note 179. There will be notes that are being put throughout this series, and they will be referred back to. They actually do start with note number 1. When I was doing this lesson in my church, this introduction is way after the beginning. But I felt it was better to put it at the beginning of this series for the YouTube series than where I had it in my lessons at church. Now, other sources that are used throughout this series are the biblically endorsed books of 1st Enoch and Jasher. By the way, both of these books were also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or portions of them at least. And this series also considers these sources as foundational and reliable. See, 1st Enoch is considered reliable because it is directly quoted by the New Testament writers Peter and Jude. In addition, Jesus and all the New Testament writers use the teachings that are found in 1st Enoch. For example, Jesus' favorite title for himself is prominently displayed throughout 1st Enoch, called the Son of Man, which is only very rarely found elsewhere in the Old Testament. The book of Jasher is considered foundational and reliable because the writers of the Old Testament books of Joshua and 2 Samuel actually tell their readers to read this book for more information and verification. Finally, this series also uses the studies and writings of various authors, scholars, and teachers, including Derek Gilbert, Michael Heiser, Alan Kirshner, Chuck Missler, G.H. Pember, Joel Richardson, Walid Shabat, Sandy Simpson, Rob Skiba, and the Sola Group. And because this series uses such a wide variety of authors, scholars, and teachers, one will find a wide variety of doctrines, ideas, and theories among these sources in general, and specifically regarding the book of Revelation. This series considers these sources reliable insofar as they agree with a literal interpretation of the Bible. This series also takes these studies and writings into consideration insofar as they do not diametrically oppose a literal interpretation of the Bible, and cautiously recommends them for study use only. That concludes the end of the introduction for the Day of the Lord, a study of the book of Revelation. Well, that was the introduction to the series, The Day of the Lord, a study of the book of Revelation. Now, if I get enough interest in these videos, then I will upload these PowerPoint slides to a hosting service, a web hosting service, so that you could look at them, you could follow along, you could refer back to them. But I would have to have a lot of interest in doing that, because I'm not getting paid by anybody to do these videos. So all expenses for it are coming out of my pocket. So I would definitely, and I'm not asking for any money. So all I'm saying is I would definitely have to have a lot of interest. I couldn't have, one or two people or two or three people just saying, hey, can you put these PowerPoint slides? Can I get these PowerPoint slides? I would have to have a lot of interest. And by the way, feel free to leave comments on the video in the comments section if you want. Anyway, like I said, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time at my kitchen table.